I used to rent this little basement apartment in a quiet suburban neighborhood. You know, the kind narrow streets, identical houses, everyone keeps to themselves. It wasn't glamorous, but the rent was cheap, utilities included, and it felt safe enough. The only thing about it was that being in the basement, my windows were basically level with the ground, looking out onto the backyard. At night, that yard was just blackness, like staring into a wall. Upstairs, I had one neighbor, an older man, maybe late 50s, early 60s, thin, balding, the kind of guy you wouldn't notice in a crowd. He'd nod in the hall when we crossed paths, sometimes make small talk about the weather. I didn't know much about him except that he lived alone. For the first few months it was fine. Quiet. He seemed harmless. Then the knocking started. It was around 3 a.m. on a Tuesday when I heard it. A faint tapping on my bedroom window. Not banging, not trying to break in. Just this weird, steady knock. I froze, half asleep, straining my ears. I thought maybe it was tree branches in the wind, but when I listened closely, it was unmistakably knuckles on glass. Knock, knock, knock. I pulled myself out of bed, heart hammering, and crept over. The blinds were drawn. I didn't want to open them, but curiosity got the better of me. I peeked. There was no one there. Just my reflection in the glass and the black backyard beyond. I stood there for a long time, waiting. Finally, I convinced myself I'd dreamed it and crawled back into bed. But as soon as I lay down, it started again. Knock, knock, knock. This time I didn't move. I just lay there, pretending I was asleep, every hair on my body standing on end. After about a minute, it stopped. I barely slept. The next night, nothing happened. I tried to shake it off. Maybe a prank, maybe a branch after all. But 2 nights later, at almost the exact same time, the knocking returned. This time it was louder, more deliberate, like someone knew I was awake and was daring me to come look. And then I heard it, a voice, low, whispering through the glass. "You awake?" I felt my stomach drop. It was my upstairs neighbor's voice. I didn't answer. I didn't move. I just lay there, gripping the sheets, barely breathing. After maybe 30 seconds, the knocking stopped. Then I heard footsteps on the grass, retreating toward the fence. That was the moment it went from creepy to terrifying, because the backyard was fenced on all sides, and the only way in was through a locked gate. How had he gotten back there? The next morning, on my way to work, I cut through the backyard to check, and that's when I saw it. A stepladder, leaned against the side of the building, right under my bedroom window. I just stood there, staring at it, the air cold in my lungs. The ladder didn't belong to me. I tried to convince myself there was some explanation. Maybe the landlord had left it, maybe the neighbor was fixing something. But why directly under my window? Why at 3 in the morning? I wanted to confront him, but I couldn't bring myself to. What would I even say? "Hey, were you outside my window, whispering at me in the middle of the night?" Instead, I dragged the ladder to the edge of the yard and left it lying flat on the ground. That night, I shoved a chair against my window and stayed up until dawn, staring into the dark. For a few nights it was quiet. I started to think maybe it was over. But then, around the same time as before, I woke to another sound. Not knocking this time. Pacing. Heavy, deliberate footsteps on the floor above me. Back and forth, directly over my bed. At first, I thought maybe he couldn't sleep, but the pacing went on for hours, not random wandering, not going to the kitchen or bathroom, just steady, methodical walking, like he was tracing my position from above, step for step. It happened again the next night, and the next, always starting around 3, always directly above me. I tried blasting music through my headphones, but I could still feel the vibrations in the ceiling. By the 4th night, I was losing my mind. One evening, I came home late from work, exhausted. As I walked down the hallway to my basement door, I noticed something strange. My upstairs neighbor's door was cracked open, just a sliver, enough to see into the dark interior. I slowed down. His place was always locked up tight. Then I heard it, whispering, low, fast, like someone talking to themselves. I couldn't make out words. I kept walking, forcing myself not to look, fumbling my key at my door. And just as I shut myself inside, I heard his footsteps approach the crack of his door. Slowly, carefully. I locked every bolt I had and sat with my back against the wall, listening. He never knocked, never came down, but I swear I could hear him breathing outside my door. I finally called my landlord the next morning, trying to sound casual. Hey, my upstairs neighbor's been acting weird. Do you know much about him? There was a pause. He's been there a long time, the landlord said finally. Pays on time, keeps to himself. I asked if there had been complaints. The landlord just sighed. Look, if he's bothering you, maybe keep your distance. He doesn't handle confrontation well. That phrasing stuck with me. Doesn't handle confrontation well. I asked what that meant, but the landlord changed the subject and hung up. That weekend, it happened again. 3 a.m. Exactly. Knock, knock, knock. This time, I didn't even pretend to be asleep. I lay there staring at the window, heart pounding, waiting for the whisper. And sure enough, "You awake?" My throat went dry. I whispered, barely audible, "Go away." Silence. Then the whisper came back, longer this time. "I know you're awake." The voice was calm, cheerful, almost. I bolted out of bed and grabbed the heaviest thing I owned, a metal lamp. I stood in the corner of the room, lamp raised, staring at the blinds. The knocking started again, harder this time, shaking the glass. Finally, it stopped. I heard footsteps retreating again across the grass. But this time, instead of fading into the distance, they moved toward the side of the house, right toward the basement door. I called 911. The cops showed up 20 minutes later. By then, the yard was empty. I told them everything. The knocking, the voice, the ladder, the pacing. They searched the yard and found nothing. No footprints, no signs of forced entry. When I mentioned my neighbor, they exchanged a look. Then one of them knocked on his door. He answered immediately, fully dressed, calm. They talked to him for a few minutes, then came back to me. He says he hasn't been outside tonight, one officer said. Do you want to press charges for harassment? I wanted to scream. Press charges for what? Knocking on a window, pacing in his own apartment? They left me with a warning to call again if anything happened. As their car pulled away, I looked up. My neighbor was standing in his upstairs window, watching me. I didn't sleep. Not that night. Not the next. On the third night, I was lying in bed, every light on, clutching the lamp, when it started again. Knock, knock, knock. But this time, the sound wasn't coming from the window. It was coming from inside the apartment, right above my head. I looked up, and I swear to God, I saw the ceiling bow slightly, dust falling from the seams, as if something was pressing down from the other side. Then I heard his voice. Not through glass this time, through wood, through plaster. I know you're awake. I moved out the next morning, packed everything into my car and left. I didn't tell the landlord. I didn't say goodbye. I just left the keys in the mailbox and drove until I couldn't anymore. That was 3 years ago. Sometimes I still wake up at 3 a.m., heart pounding, waiting for the sound. And sometimes, just before I fall back asleep, I swear I can still hear it. Knock, knock, knock. When I first moved into my apartment complex, I was just happy to have a place of my own. It wasn't luxury living by any means. Stained carpet, walls painted the same lifeless beige, a faint smell of cigarettes baked into everything, but it was mine. Cheap rent, no roommates, and close enough to work that I could walk. That was all I wanted. There were 6 units in my building, 3 on each side of a long hallway. Mine was at the end, across from a door that was always locked. That door would come to dominate my life. From the beginning, it felt strange. Every other apartment had signs of life shoes outside, welcome mats, the muffled sound of TVs behind the walls. But not that one. The blinds on its single window were always drawn tight. No decorations, no sign of anyone coming or going. The doorknob was shiny, like it had been polished. At first, I assumed it was vacant. I even asked the building manager, a cranky guy named James, who smelled like beer and motor oil. "Oh, that one," he said, brushing me off. "Don't worry about it, just keep to yourself. That should have been the end of it." But you know how once you notice something strange, you can't stop paying attention to it? That's how it was with that door. Every time I left for work, every time I came home, it was there, always shut, always locked. It started maybe 2 weeks after I moved in. I was coming back from a late shift, exhausted, keys jingling in my hand. As I passed the door, I heard something from the other side, A shuffle. Like footsteps. I froze. Pressed my ear against the wood. For a second, there was silence. Then the faintest whisper. It wasn't clear words, just a low, hurried sound. I jumped back, heart racing. I remember fumbling into my apartment, locking the door, and standing in the dark with my back pressed against it. Vacant, huh? For the next few days, I avoided it. Head down, straight into my apartment. No lingering. But I couldn't shake the curiosity. And then one night, everything changed. It was just after midnight. I'd gone out for snacks, came back with a bag of chips and soda. As I stepped into the hall, I saw it. The door across the hall was open. Not wide open, just a crack, enough for a slice of yellowish light to spill into the hall. I froze, mid-step. The air felt heavier, like I'd just walked into a room where someone had been crying. For a long time, I stood there staring. Should I call Al? Should I peek in? Should I knock? In the end, I did nothing. I went into my apartment and locked the door, telling myself I didn't want to get involved. But all night, I couldn't stop picturing that thin crack of light. It was 2 nights later. I woke up to a sound. Scratch, scratch, scratch. At first, I thought it was an animal, maybe mice in the walls. But as I listened, I realized it was coming from my front door. I crept out of bed, every nerve in my body screaming not to look, but I had to. I pressed my eye to the peephole and nearly screamed. The door across the hall was wide open, pitch black inside, and crouched in my doorway was a figure, scratching the wood with both hands. I couldn't see their face, just hunched shoulders, long hair hanging forward, fingers dragging up and down my doorframe. I stumbled back, clapping a hand over my mouth. When I finally found the courage to look again, the hallway was empty, both doors shut tight. I told Al the next morning. My voice shook as I explained what I'd seen, the scratching, the open door. He gave me this look, like I was a child making up ghost stories. "Place is empty," he said. "Always has been. Don't go scaring yourself." But I saw. "You didn't see anything." That was the end of the conversation. I wanted to argue, but there was something final in his tone, like he wasn't telling me the whole story, and didn't want me asking more questions. Weeks passed. I tried to convince myself I'd imagined it. Stress, exhaustion, bad lighting, anything. Then it happened again. This time, I was awake, sitting on my couch, headphones on, when I noticed movement under the door. Shadows. Feet. I pulled the headphones off, held my breath, and then, clear as day, I heard it. A voice, right outside. "Let me in." 3 words. Soft, pleading. I stood frozen, staring at the door, waiting for it to rattle, for someone to pound, but it didn't. The voice just repeated, lower each time, "Let me in, let me in," then silence. I sat there until morning, lights on, shaking. Eventually, I couldn't take it. I had to know. One evening, when I was sure the hall was empty, I tried the door across the hall. Locked. I pressed my ear against it. Nothing. But then I noticed something scratched into the paint near the knob. Tiny lines, carved deep, dozens of them, like fingernail marks. The last night I lived there was the worst. I woke up at exactly 3 a.m. to a knock. Not on my window, not on my bedroom door. On the door across the hall, I froze, straining to hear. Knock, knock, knock. Then a pause. Knock, knock, knock. And then, after a long silence, the sound of my doorknob turning. Slowly, carefully, I lunged out of bed and pressed my weight against the door, heart pounding, tears stinging my eyes. On the other side, I could hear breathing, heavy, right against the wood. For what felt like an hour, I stood there, shaking, until finally, it stopped. When I checked the peephole, both doors were closed. The next morning, I packed a bag and left. Called a friend. Told them I needed a couch to crash on. A week later, I broke the lease. Before I left, I asked Al one last time, "Who lives there?" He gave me the same look as before. "No one," he said. "Not for years." I pressed him. Told him what I'd heard, what I'd seen. Finally, his face softened. He sighed. "There was a girl," he said quietly, "years back. Lived there alone. Nobody really knew her. One day, she stopped paying rent. We went in to check and he trailed off. Place was empty. No furniture, no clothes. Like she'd never been there at all. I asked what happened to her. He just shook his head. "Don't worry about it." And that was it. It's been 2 years since I moved out. Sometimes I wonder if I dreamed it all. Stress, bad sleep, paranoia. That's what I tell myself. But sometimes, late at night, I wake up convinced I hear it again. The scratching. The voice. Let me in. I never thought much about neighbors before this all happened. You know, I always figured you live next to someone. You wave when you see them. Maybe you borrow some sugar or lend out a lawnmower. But beyond that, you stay in your own lane. You don't dig too deep. You don't make it complicated. And for most of my life that worked fine. I never had a reason to distrust the person living next door, until the year I moved into that little rental house on the edge of town and made the mistake of lending my neighbor a hammer. I had just moved in. It was the kind of place you find after scrolling listings for weeks, cheap enough to afford on my paycheck, small but with a backyard, and after years of apartments with thin walls and loud roommates, it felt like freedom, like I finally had space that was mine. The street was quiet, mostly older families, nothing fancy, just rows of one-story homes that all looked a little worn down but still lived in, the kind of neighborhood where people leave lawn chairs out and kids' bikes in the driveway. My next-door neighbor introduced himself the first day. His name was Rick, probably late 40s, maybe early 50s, thinning brown hair, a face that looked like it had been out in the sun too long, leathery, red around the nose, and this smile that was polite but stayed on his lips a little too long, like he was rehearsing it in a mirror. He shook my hand, asked a lot of questions, what I did for work, if I lived alone, if I had family nearby, what kind of hours I kept. Questions that at the time just felt like small talk, but later on I'd replay in my head and realize how oddly specific they were, like he was logging the information away. But in that moment I thought nothing of it. He seemed like any other lonely middle-aged guy living by himself. For the first few weeks I barely saw him. Sometimes I'd catch him smoking on the porch late at night, or mowing his lawn in cargo shorts. He'd wave. I'd wave back. That was it. Then one Saturday afternoon there was a knock at my door. I opened it, and there was Rick, standing there with that half smile, and he said, "Hey buddy, you got a hammer I could borrow? I need to fix something out back." It seemed harmless, neighborly, exactly the kind of thing you do when you want to build a little goodwill. So I said sure, grabbed my toolbox, and handed him my hammer. He thanked me, promised he'd bring it right back, and walked off with it. Only he didn't bring it right back. Days went by, then a week, then two, and I realized I hadn't seen my hammer since. Normally I wouldn't care, it was just a hammer. I had other tools, but every time I went into the garage I'd notice that empty slot in the toolbox and feel a little itch in the back of my mind. Around this time Rick's behavior started to change, or maybe I just started noticing it more. I'd be grilling in the backyard and see him standing just on the other side of the fence, not saying anything, just watching, cigarette in hand, smoke curling into the air. When I caught his eye, he'd smile too quickly and ask something strange, like, "Do you sleep with your windows open? Or what kind of security system do you use?" And I'd laugh it off because how do you answer that without sounding paranoid? After 3 weeks, I decided to just ask for my hammer back. So one evening I walked over and knocked on his door. He answered almost immediately, like he had been standing right there waiting. "Hey," I said, "remember that hammer I lent you? Could I grab it back?" For a split second I swear his expression changed, like something sour slipped through before he plastered on the smile again. "Yeah, sure thing," he said. "Hold on." He shut the door and I stood there on the porch waiting, and that's when I heard it. This dragging sound, something heavy scraping across the floor inside, then silence, then more shuffling. After maybe a full minute he opened the door just a crack and handed me the hammer. The metal was sticky, dark. My first thought was grease, or maybe old paint. But as the porch light hit it, I swear it looked red. Too red. "Thanks," I muttered, not wanting to say anything, not wanting to know. He nodded, no words, and closed the door so fast it nearly clipped my fingers. Back inside my house, I set the hammer on the counter and stared at it. The smell wasn't paint. It was coppery. I scrubbed it with bleach until the rag came away pink, but I couldn't shake the image of Rick dragging something heavy right before handing it back to me. That night I barely slept. Over the next couple of weeks, things escalated. I realized I hadn't seen Rick's wife in a long time. When I first moved in, I'd caught a glimpse of her unloading groceries from their car. A tall woman with long brown hair, polite smile, seemed normal enough. After that, nothing. No car in the driveway for her. No lights on in the back rooms. No sound of another voice in the house. Just Rick, always Rick, hauling black garbage bags to the curb late at night, sometimes at 2 or 3 in the morning, sometimes with stains on his shirt. I wanted to believe I was imagining things, that maybe she traveled a lot, or worked nights, but in my gut, I knew better. One night I was out walking and saw him digging in the backyard, under the light of a single flood lamp. Sweat dripping off him, shovel biting into the dirt. I froze in the shadows, watching him, and every part of me screamed to call the cops, but I didn't. I told myself it wasn't my business. I told myself I had no proof. Then came the night with the flashing lights. It was close to midnight. I was working late when red and blue beams cut through my window. I looked out and saw 3 squad cars pulled up in front of Rick's house, officers spilling out onto the lawn, flashlights sweeping the yard. I went outside pretending to be curious like the rest of the neighbors who had gathered. One officer told me flatly it was a routine check and to go back inside, but it was anything but routine. I watched as they pulled Rick out of the house in cuffs, shirtless, sweating, wild-eyed. I watched them swarm the backyard, pry up sections of the garage floor, haul out evidence bags, and I swear to God, in one of those bags I saw my hammer, sealed away in plastic, the same hammer I had scrubbed raw weeks earlier. The news later reported suspected foul play, possible human remains found, but they never gave details, never confirmed it was his wife, never said what else they found in that house, but I didn't need confirmation. I knew. I still replay the whole thing in my head, how many chances I had to speak up, how many moments I brushed off as nothing. The red stain on the hammer, the dragging sound, the missing wife, the late-night digging, all of it, and the worst part is that hammer is still with me. The cops never came to take mine. Maybe they assumed theirs was the real one. Maybe they thought it was unrelated. I don't know, but after everything settled I found it back in my garage like it had never left. Sometimes I think I should throw it away, but I can't bring myself to, because every time I touch it I feel like it's still holding on to something. Like a part of her is still clinging to the metal. Late at night when the house is quiet I'll hear a sound from the garage, faint but steady, like metal striking bone. And I lie there in the dark telling myself it's just my imagination. But deep down I know I'll never really be rid of that hammer, or of the neighbor who asked for it, or of the mistake I made when I let him borrow it. I grew up in a place where houses were separated by fields, where if you looked out your bedroom window at night all you saw was the stretch of sky and the black shapes of trees in the distance. And maybe, if you looked hard enough, the dim orange glow of a porch light half a mile down the road. Nights were so quiet there that you could hear frogs croaking by the creek and owls calling from the woods, and I think that kind of silence gets into your bones when you grow up with it. You start to believe it's the way the world is supposed to sound when you're trying to sleep. So when I moved to the city, it felt like stepping into another planet. Everything was compressed and stacked and restless, and the silence I'd always known was replaced with the constant hum of traffic, the distant sirens that rose and fell through the night, and the sound of people above me and below me and beside me, all living their own lives pressed so close against mine that sometimes I felt like the walls were made of paper. I told myself I'd get used to it, that this was the price you paid when you wanted better work and a chance at something bigger than small-town life. I tried to convince myself the noise and closeness were just part of the deal, but deep down I missed the open fields. I missed the distance between myself and other people, and I missed knowing nobody was close enough to watch me without me knowing it. The apartment I found wasn't much, but it was all I could afford. The building was old, the kind of place that looked like it had been patched up over the years without ever being properly fixed. The stairwell walls were streaked with peeling paint. The carpet in the hallways had dark stains that never quite went away, no matter how often they vacuumed, and the elevator always creaked and stuttered like it was considering whether to move at all. My unit was a one-bedroom, narrow and boxy but manageable. It had just enough space for me to live without feeling like I was trapped in a closet, and I told myself I could make it home if I added the right touches. The best feature, or what I thought would be the best feature at first, was the little balcony, barely big enough for a chair and a potted plant, but it gave me somewhere to step outside without having to leave the building. The living room window opened onto that balcony, and when I pulled the blinds open I had a view straight across the alley to the building opposite. That view unsettled me from the start. The alley wasn't wide at all, maybe 12 feet across at most, which meant that when I opened my blinds I wasn't looking out at the city skyline or the sky above. I was staring directly into the windows of someone else's apartment. At first I told myself it was just part of city living, that you traded privacy for convenience, but the more I looked, the more uncomfortable it made me. It was like living inside a giant dollhouse, each window across the alley a glowing cutout frame into someone else's life. I'd catch flashes of people cooking dinner, folding laundry, arguing, watching TV, and sometimes I'd realize with a start that if I could see them that clearly, then they could see me too. I promised myself I'd keep my blinds drawn most of the time, but at night I sometimes broke that promise. The glow of neon signs from the street below would bounce off the wet pavement, and scattered rectangles of yellow light glowed across from me, each one holding a slice of another life. And for a while it was comforting. It made me feel less alone to know that while I was sitting at my laptop or eating takeout on the couch, there were people across from me doing the same kinds of things. It was ordinary, harmless, just life happening side by side. At least, that's what I thought at first, before I realized that one of those rectangles wasn't just a slice of someone else's life, it was staring straight back into mine. The first time I noticed him was late at night, maybe close to midnight, when I had been sitting at my laptop too long and decided to stand up, stretch my legs, and grab some water from the kitchen. I opened the blinds just a little, out of habit more than anything, and that's when I saw him sitting in a chair directly across the alley, lit by the dim yellow glow of a single lamp. At first I thought nothing of it, just another night owl like me, someone who worked late or couldn't sleep, but something about the way he sat there struck me. He wasn't reading, he wasn't watching TV, he wasn't eating or moving around like most people did in their homes. He was just sitting perfectly still in that chair, facing forward, staring straight through the glass. I told myself it was a coincidence, that maybe his gaze just happened to line up with my window, but the longer I stood there, the more convinced I became that he wasn't staring into space, he was staring at me. I closed the blinds quickly and went back to my couch, shaking off the feeling like it was nothing. But it stayed in the back of my mind. The next night it happened again. Same time, same chair, same dim yellow glow, and the same unblinking posture. He was there, waiting, and as soon as I stepped into my living room I felt the weight of his eyes on me. I tested myself by moving out of sight and then stepping back into the window frame, and every time his head followed, ever so slightly, as if tracking my movements. I felt my chest tighten, but I told myself not to be paranoid. City life was like this, wasn't it? Sometimes you caught someone's eye across the way, and maybe it was awkward, but it wasn't sinister. Only, this didn't feel like a glance. It felt like surveillance. A week went by, and every night he was there. He never missed. I stopped turning on my lights in the evening, started walking around my apartment in the dark just so he couldn't see me. Once, out of frustration, I snapped my blinds open and stood there with my arms crossed, glaring across the alley, silently daring him to look away. For a long minute he didn't move at all, didn't even blink, and then, slowly, his mouth twisted into this crooked half-smile that made my stomach drop. It wasn't a friendly smile, not like a neighbor acknowledging another neighbor. It was something mocking, something that said he knew I saw him, and he enjoyed it. I remember slamming the blinds shut and feeling my pulse in my ears, a rush of heat crawling up my neck. That was the first time I admitted to myself that something about him was wrong. I even tested it once. I flicked my lights off suddenly and ducked down by the window frame so I could peek without being seen. In the glow of that yellow lamp across the way, I could see him leaning forward slightly, eyes fixed on the dark glass, like he was trying to pierce the shadows and find me. I told myself I was being dramatic, that he was just a lonely man who had nothing better to do. But deep down I knew better. This wasn't curiosity or boredom. This was attention, focused, intentional, and every night it seemed more and more directed at me. It was a friend who finally broke my denial. She'd come over one Saturday evening to drop off some books and stayed for a glass of wine, sitting on my couch while I cooked something simple on the stove. The blinds were cracked just enough to let the neon glow from the street below creep in, and as we were talking, she suddenly leaned forward and frowned. "Who's that?" she asked, pointing at the window across the alley. I turned and there he was, like always, sitting in his chair under that weak yellow lamp, staring at us. The sight of him in front of someone else made my skin prickle. "That's the guy across the way," I said carefully. "He's always there at night." She looked at me like I'd said something insane. "There's no one across from you," she said. "I live 2 floors below that line of windows. Above me is nothing but maintenance space. There's no apartment on that floor." At first I laughed nervously and told her she must be wrong, but she wasn't smiling. "Seriously," she said, "that wall's solid. It's always been solid, no windows." Her words rattled me, but after she left I tried to shove them out of my mind. That night, though, I couldn't resist. I threw on a jacket, went down to the street, and walked across the alley to the other side. Cold air hit my face as I looked up. My stomach lurched. She was right. Directly across from my window was a blank expanse of concrete, no windows, no balcony, nothing. The place where I'd seen the man night after night was just solid gray wall. I stood there in the dark for a long time, cars hissing by on wet pavement, staring up at nothing where something should have been. My brain tried to explain it. Maybe I had the wrong window. Maybe there was some trick of perspective, but when I went back upstairs and opened my blinds again, there he was, sitting in his chair, staring at me like he knew exactly what I'd just seen. After that night, things stopped feeling like coincidence and started feeling like a game I hadn't agreed to play. Before, I could almost convince myself he was just some lonely guy wasting time at a window. But once I knew there wasn't supposed to be a window at all, every glance across the alley felt like staring into something impossible, like a dream I couldn't wake up from. And he knew I knew he had to. His behavior changed, subtle at first. Instead of sitting in his chair motionless, he started leaning closer to the glass, close enough that I could see the pale shine of his teeth when he smiled. Sometimes he'd raise his hand slowly, deliberately, and wave in this exaggerated way that sent chills crawling up my arms. It was always late, always when I thought I was alone. I started keeping my blinds shut nearly all the time, but that only made me more paranoid. Every creak of the building at night made me imagine him behind the fabric, his eyes locked on me, just waiting for me to slip. Once I cracked the blinds open just an inch, thinking maybe he'd finally stopped. Maybe I'd imagined it all. But no, he was pressed so close to the glass that his face filled the entire frame, smiling like he'd been waiting for that one sliver of opportunity to show me he was still there. I dropped the cord so fast it slapped against the wall and stumbled backward, heart pounding. Sleep became impossible. I started leaving lights on all night, sometimes the TV too, because silence made the tension worse. I'd catch myself listening for things breathing that wasn't mine, footsteps in the hall, the faint scrape of glass. My friends started noticing I looked tired, jumpy, but I couldn't bring myself to tell them what was happening. How do you explain that a man keeps appearing in a window that doesn't exist? The worst was the night I made the mistake of testing him again. I stood in the dark, hidden at the edge of my blinds, watching. He sat still for nearly an hour, unmoving, and just when I thought maybe I'd imagined it all, he suddenly tilted his head, eyes gleaming, and gave me the slowest, widest grin I'd ever seen. It wasn't playful. It wasn't friendly. It was a promise that he was patient, and that sooner or later I'd have to look again. I thought I'd reached my limit already, that the worst he could do was stare from across the alley, but I was wrong. The night it changed, I remember exactly. It was just after 3 a.m, the streets below empty except for a stray cat picking through a trash bag. I had fallen asleep on the couch with the TV still on, and the glow flickered against my eyelids until a noise woke me. At first I thought it was the radiator again, that familiar creak and groan of old pipes, but then I realized it wasn't random. It was rhythmic, a soft, deliberate tapping, like fingertips on glass. I held still, listening. Tap, pause, tap, tap. My first thought was he was doing it across the alley, but the sound was too close, too sharp, like it was coming from inside the room. I forced myself upright, my heart slamming so hard it made my vision shake, and turned toward the living room window. The blinds were down, but the thin fabric swayed as if someone had brushed against it. I told myself it was a draft. I told myself anything but the truth. Slowly, trying to be quiet, I reached out and lifted one edge of the blinds. Across the alley, the window was dark. No chair, no lamp, no man, just empty black. Relief hit me so hard I almost laughed out loud. But then the tapping came again behind me. I froze. It was closer now, crisp and distinct, the sound of nails or knuckles on glass where no glass should have been. My whole body wanted to bolt, but some morbid instinct made me turn around, and there it was. Another window, one I had never seen before, set into the wall of my kitchen where there had only ever been drywall. The frame was narrow and tall, its glass faintly misted as if someone's breath had fogged it. My legs went weak. I couldn't even process it. There was no fire escape outside, no building pressed against that wall, nothing that window could possibly lead to. And yet, through the glass I saw him. His face was inches from mine, pressed close enough that the skin around his eyes wrinkled as he grinned. That grin was so wide it looked painful, stretching past the normal limits of a mouth, teeth showing in a way that didn't seem human. His hand was up too, palm flat against the pane, fingers long and pale and slightly bent, tapping, tap tap tap, each one sending a vibration through my kitchen floor. I stumbled backward until I hit the counter, my phone in my hand without even remembering picking it up. I dialed 911, voice shaking so bad the dispatcher kept asking me to repeat myself. I told them there was someone at my window, a man inside my apartment somehow, that he wasn't supposed to be there. They told me to stay calm, to stay on the line. I backed into the living room, never taking my eyes off that impossible window. His grin never wavered, his eyes never blinked. And then, as I watched, he did something I still see in my nightmares. He tilted his head back and started to press his forehead slowly against the glass, harder and harder, like he was testing the barrier between us. A faint cracking noise spiderwebbed through the pane. I screamed and dropped the phone. The line went dead. I don't know how long I stood there frozen, waiting for the glass to shatter and for him to pour through. But then there was a pounding at my door and voices shouting. It was the police. Somehow they'd come quickly, maybe because my voice had been that terrified, maybe because they'd had calls before. I don't know. I tore my eyes from the window just long enough to unlock the door, and when I looked back over my shoulder, the kitchen wall was solid again. No frame, no glass, just blank drywall like nothing had ever been there. The cops searched my apartment from end to end while I stood shaking in the hall, trying not to sound insane as I explained what I'd seen. Of course, they found nothing. No strange man, no broken glass, no hidden window. When I led them into the kitchen and pointed to the exact spot where the frame had been, one of them tapped the wall with his knuckles and gave me that look people give when they think you're losing it. Solid, he said flatly. I wanted to argue, wanted to scream at them that I wasn't lying, but what proof did I have? They wrote it off as stress, maybe a nightmare I'd confused with reality. I tried to believe that too, but when I was alone again and the silence returned, I noticed something they hadn't. On the floor just below where the window had been, faint but undeniable, were smudges. Greasy, human handprints, 5 long streaks as though someone had pressed their palm against the wall and dragged it down. I scrubbed them off until my fingers hurt, but the memory of them stayed. I couldn't sleep after that, couldn't even close my eyes without hearing that slow tapping in the dark. I broke my lease 2 weeks later, packed what I could, and left in the middle of the night without telling a soul. The landlord didn't ask questions, probably glad to have me gone. For a while I thought I was safe, thought maybe putting distance between myself and that building would end it. But the truth is, distance doesn't matter. Sometimes when I wake in the middle of the night, I don't even have to look. I can feel it, a weight in the room, a presence just beyond the edge of my vision. And when I'm stupid enough to turn my head, I swear I catch a glimpse of pale skin pressed against the darkened glass, lips curling back into that grin that tells me he's patient, that walls and distance mean nothing, that one night soon he'll find a new way inside. When I first moved into that building, I told myself it was exactly what I needed: cheap rent, decent location, and just quiet enough that I could finally focus on my work without the constant noise of roommates or traffic. It was an old brick apartment complex tucked between 2 newer constructions, almost easy to miss if you didn't know it was there. The hallways smelled faintly of dust and old wood, the kind of scent that seeps into a place over decades, but it was sturdy, with thick doors and small but functional rooms. The landlord was an older man, gray hair slicked back, polite enough but not particularly warm. As he showed me around, he went over the usual points: utilities, laundry room schedules, where the mailboxes were, and then, almost as an afterthought, he mentioned the basement. "It's locked," he said flatly, jingling the set of keys in his hand but making no move to show me which one fit. "Just storage down there, nothing you'll need. Door stays closed." His tone carried something final in it, and I didn't push. It was strange, though usually basements in old buildings like that were laundry areas, or at least half-open spaces, but the way he brushed it off made it seem like more than just storage. Still, I was tired, eager to move in, and happy enough with the price that I didn't care. The first week went by uneventfully. The building had a stillness to it, a hush that was almost comforting at first, like living inside a library. But every so often, when I was lying in bed at night, I would swear I felt a faint vibration in the floor, like someone moving around in the level below me. The landlord had said no one went into the basement, but sometimes I thought I could hear faint thuds or something dragging across concrete. I told myself it was nothing, just pipes, the building settling, the echoes of city life. But even then, in the back of my mind, I already knew something about that basement wasn't right. It was maybe 2 weeks after I moved in when the sound started to get harder to ignore. At first it was nothing more than a faint knock here or there, something I could dismiss as heating pipes expanding. But gradually the noises grew more distinct. One night, lying awake well past midnight, I heard what I can only describe as the sound of slow, deliberate footsteps. Not above me, not beside me, directly beneath me. In the locked basement the landlord had sworn was just storage. The rhythm was steady, heavy, the sound of boots dragging slightly with each step. I sat up in bed, straining to listen, and after a few moments the footsteps stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the sound itself, like whoever was down there knew I was listening. The next day I brought it up casually to a woman who lived 2 doors down. She was middle-aged, friendly enough, the type to nod hello in the hallway. I joked that I thought the basement might be haunted, but her smile dropped immediately. "You hear things down there?" she asked, voice low. I nodded, suddenly feeling foolish. After a pause she said, "Don't worry about it. Old building. Carrie sounds strange." Then she changed the subject as if the conversation had never happened. The shift in her expression unnerved me more than the noises themselves. The following nights it got worse. I started hearing scraping, like something heavy being dragged across the cement floor. Once, as I stood barefoot in the kitchen, I felt a vibration travel up through the tiles, faint but unmistakable, as if something massive had shifted directly underneath me. My stomach turned cold. I tried knocking on the basement door one evening, more out of frustration than courage, but no sound came back, no movement, only silence pressing against me from the other side. Another tenant, an older man with a cane, caught me lingering by the door one afternoon. His eyes narrowed and he muttered, "Don't go down there. Just don't." His voice cracked with something that wasn't just warning but fear. When I asked him what he meant, he only shook his head and hobbled away. That night the noises grew bold. A slow, dragging sound echoed for nearly an hour, stopping and starting as if something down there was circling directly below my apartment. Just as I was about to put in earbuds and try to drown it out, the sound stopped, replaced by something worse. A faint whisper, too low to make out words, but too intentional to dismiss as pipes or wind. It rose and fell like someone speaking softly right beneath the floorboards. My heart raced as I pressed my ear to the ground, only to jerk back when the whisper cut off mid-breath, as if whoever or whatever was down there realized I was listening again. By the 3rd week, I couldn't ignore it anymore. What started as faint noises at night turned into something that felt deliberate, like whatever was in the basement had grown bolder, aware that I noticed it. My flashlight revealed stone walls sweating with moisture, pipes running overhead, puddles glistening on the floor. At first it looked like any old basement, cold, empty, forgotten. But then I saw the signs. In the far corner was a stained mattress lying flat on the concrete, surrounded by crumpled food wrappers and half-burned candles. The walls nearby were covered in scratches, deep gouges carved into the stone like fingernails dragged across it again and again. My breath caught in my throat as I realized someone or something had been living down here. The sound of dripping water echoed in the dark, but beneath it was another sound, faint but steady, breathing. I swung the flashlight toward the far end of the room, and that's when I saw him. At first he blended with the shadows, a hunched figure pressed into the corner, unmoving. His head was bent at an odd angle, long arms wrapped around his knees. For a moment I thought maybe it was just a trick of the light, some pile of junk creating the illusion of a man, but then he shifted. Slowly, his head lifted, and 2 pale eyes reflected the beam back at me. My body locked up. His face was wrong too long, mouth stretched too wide as though it had been pulled into a grin it couldn't relax from. He didn't speak, didn't move closer. He just sat there, staring, like he'd been waiting for me all along. My flashlight shook in my hand, the beam trembling across the damp walls, but his gaze never left mine. Then he moved. Not toward me, Not away, just a slow rise to his feet. Joints cracking, his body unfolding in unnatural angles. His head tilted, almost curious, and in a voice that was broken, jagged, like it was piecing together words it had stolen, he whispered, "I know you." That was enough to break me. I turned and bolted up the stairs, my flashlight beam swinging wildly against the walls. Behind me, heavy footsteps pounded the concrete, far too fast, far too loud. He was following. I don't think I've ever run faster in my life. My legs carried me up the basement stairs 2 at a time. Lungs burning. Every nerve screaming that if I slowed for even a second he'd have me. The sound behind me was unbearable, those pounding footsteps, far heavier than mine, reverberating through the narrow stairwell. I could hear his breathing too, ragged and wet, so close it felt like it was brushing the back of my neck. Somehow I reached the top, slammed the basement door shut, and threw the bolt across. A split second later, the wood shuddered as something massive hit it from the other side. I staggered backward into the hallway, gasping, as the blows came again and again, rattling the door in its frame. I thought the lock would give. I thought he'd smash his way out and I'd be trapped, screaming, in that narrow corridor. I ran for my apartment, fumbling with my keys, hands shaking so bad I nearly dropped them. Behind me the banging stopped, and that silence was somehow worse. I turned just as the hall light above me flickered. In the dim glow, I saw the door handle to the basement turning slowly, steadily, like someone was testing it from the other side. I don't know how I got my apartment door open, but somehow I did. I slammed it shut, locked it, and pressed my entire weight against it, listening to my own heartbeat thunder in my ears. For a moment there was nothing, and I thought maybe he'd stayed below. Maybe I'd imagined how close he'd been. But then came the sound of something heavy dragging itself down the hallway outside my apartment. Not footsteps this time, more like nails scraping across the walls. A slow, deliberate slide. I pressed my eye to the peephole and nearly screamed. He was there, standing directly outside my door. Even hunched, his head nearly brushed the top of the frame. His grin was stretched impossibly wide, cheeks cracked at the corners, eyes pale and gleaming like wet stones. He lifted one long finger and slowly dragged it across my door, the screeching sound making my teeth ache. Then, in that broken voice, he rasped, "You let me out." My knees buckled. I backed away, phone clutched in my hand. I dialed 911. I don't even remember what I told the operator. Words tumbled out, half screams, begging them to send someone fast. The pounding on my door started almost immediately after, each blow making the wood groan. I could see the frame bending, dust sprinkling from the edges. I thought it was over, that no matter how quickly help came, it wouldn't be fast enough. And then, just as suddenly as it started, the pounding stopped. Silence filled the apartment, so deep it rang in my ears. I didn't dare move. I stayed crouched there, phone still pressed to my ear, staring at the door as if sheer focus could hold it shut. When the police finally arrived, the hallway was empty. The basement door was locked again, padlock rusted and unmoved, no signs of forced entry, no evidence of anyone in the building but me. One officer gave me the same look I'd seen from the landlord, that mix of pity and disbelief. They searched, found nothing, and left me with a suggestion to get some rest. But I knew rest wasn't possible anymore. Not after I'd seen him so close, not after I'd heard that voice scrape out words meant only for me. I didn't stay in that building much longer. After the night he came to my door, I barely lasted a week before packing everything I could fit into boxes and leaving in the middle of the night. The landlord didn't try to stop me, didn't even ask why I was breaking the lease. He just handed me back the deposit in cash, eyes low, like he'd been through this before and knew better than to argue. That silence said more than any words could. He knew. He'd always known. I moved across town into a newer building with bright hallways and too many locks on the doors, the kind of place that felt sterile but safe. For a little while, I convinced myself I'd escaped. No more footsteps below, no whispers through the floor, no grinning face at the door. But the thing about fear is it lingers, sticks to you like smoke. I couldn't sleep without every light on. I kept a knife by the bed, a chair jammed under the doorknob. Friends started asking why I looked so tired, why I jumped at every sound, but I never told them. How could I? Who would believe me? The worst part, though, is that I know I didn't leave him behind. The first night in the new apartment, just when I was starting to drift into an uneasy sleep, I heard the faint sound of something dragging across concrete. It was far away, muffled, but unmistakable. I sat up in bed, holding my breath, telling myself it was nothing, just the neighbors or the elevator. But then, as the room settled into silence, I heard it again. Closer this time. A low chuckle, broken and wet, rising up through the floorboards. And that's when I understood. He was never trapped in the basement. The basement was just where he waited. Now he knows where to find me, and sooner or later, he'll be at my door again. When I first moved into that building, I thought I'd finally caught a break. Rent was cheap, the neighborhood was quiet, and my apartment sat on the very top floor. No one above me, just the roof and the sky. After years of listening to neighbors stomp, argue, and blast their TVs at midnight, that silence felt like a gift. The landlord, a man in his 60s named Mr. Harris, handed me the keys with a tired smile and said, "You'll like it up there. Nothing but air above your head." I didn't think much about the way he paused before adding, "It's been empty a long time." My first week was peaceful. The apartment was small but clean, with slanted ceilings and a big window that looked out over the city. At night, I'd stand there and watch the lights shimmer in the distance, feeling like maybe, finally, life was settling into something steady. Then, about 10 days after moving in, I woke up around 2 in the morning to a sound I couldn't place, a slow, heavy thud, thud, thud that traveled from one end of the ceiling to the other. At first, I thought maybe someone was on the roof maintenance, maybe, or kids who'd climbed up somehow. But when I opened the window, the night was still. I went back to bed, told myself it was the old wood contracting, or the wind. The next night it happened again. Footsteps, steady and deliberate, pacing back and forth right above my head. I stared at the ceiling, holding my breath, listening. The steps would stop for a few seconds, then start again, dragging slightly, as if whoever it was had a limp. The next morning I asked Mr. Harris if anyone had access to the roof. He frowned and shook his head. "No one's supposed to. It's sealed. The door's been welded shut since before I bought the place." I must have looked doubtful, because he added, "If you're hearing something, it's probably raccoons. They get under the eaves sometimes." I nodded, but the explanation didn't sit right. The sound wasn't scurrying or scratching. It was pacing, human pacing. Over the next week, the noises got worse. Some nights it sounded like furniture scraping across the floor. Other times I'd hear faint tapping, as if someone was drumming their fingers right above my bed. Once, around 3 a.m., I heard something heavy drop, followed by what sounded like a chair being dragged across the floorboards. I barely slept. Every creak made my skin crawl. I even went up to the attic hatch in the hallway one afternoon, just to prove to myself it was all in my head. The hatch was covered with a padlocked grate, dusty and unmoved for what looked like years. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone was up there. One night I decided to record the sounds. I set my phone on the nightstand, hit record, and lay in bed pretending to sleep. Around 1:40 a.m., the footsteps started. Slow, rhythmic, moving from one corner of the ceiling to the other. I held perfectly still. After maybe 20 minutes, the noises stopped, and I finally drifted into an uneasy sleep. The next morning, I played back the recording. At first it was just what I expected. Faint creaks, footsteps, the low hum of the refrigerator in the background. But then, about 16 minutes in, I heard something else. A whisper. So soft I almost missed it. I turned up the volume, pressed the phone to my ear, and heard it again, my name. Drawn out, breathy, almost playful. "Daniel." I froze. There was no mistaking it. It wasn't my imagination. Someone had whispered my name from the ceiling. I replayed it over and over until I couldn't convince myself it was just interference. That day, I called the landlord again. When I told him about the recording, there was a long silence on the other end of the line before he said quietly, "You shouldn't be hearing anything up there." His voice trembled slightly, like he was holding something back. When I pressed, he snapped, "Don't go looking for trouble, son. Let it be." Then he hung up. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I kept every light on, sat in the living room with my back against the wall, listening. Around 3 a.m., The footsteps started again, but this time they didn't stop. They paced directly above me for nearly half an hour. Then something changed. The sound moved closer to the edge of the ceiling, toward the wall where the attic hatch was on the other side. The footsteps stopped, and I swear I heard a faint scratching noise, like fingernails dragging along the wood. I tried to tell myself it was rats, wind, anything, but then came a slow, deliberate knock on the ceiling. 3 times, perfectly spaced. I couldn't move. The knocks came again, louder, closer. I stumbled to the bedroom, slammed the door, and sat in the corner until sunrise. By morning, I'd decided I was done playing scared. I grabbed my flashlight and a small crowbar from my toolbox and went up to the attic hatch. The grate was still padlocked, but the metal was old and brittle. I hesitated for a long moment, then forced it open. Dust poured down like ash. When I shined the flashlight up through the opening, all I saw was insulation and wooden beams. No footprints, no signs of anyone living there. But the air that drifted down was strange, cold, metallic, almost like the smell of old blood. I climbed up onto a chair and pushed the hatch higher, sweeping the light in slow circles. That's when I saw it. An old rocking chair in the far corner, gently swaying back and forth. There was no breeze, no movement except that chair. My stomach twisted. I slammed the hatch shut and backed away, shaking so hard I nearly dropped the flashlight. After that, the noises stopped for 2 nights straight. I tried to convince myself I'd scared off whatever animal was up there. But on the 3rd night, just as I started to relax, I woke to a new sound whispering, not from the ceiling this time, but from the vent near my bed. Dozens of voices, soft and layered, murmuring over each other. I leaned closer, heart pounding, and caught fragments. He's listening. He opened it. He shouldn't have looked. Then, suddenly, the whispers stopped and a single voice, clear as day, whispered, "Behind you." I spun around so fast I nearly fell. No one was there, of course. The apartment was empty, lights still on. But when I looked back at the vent, something small and dark slipped out of sight behind the slats, too quick to make out. That was the moment I realized whatever was happening wasn't just in the attic anymore. I called the police the next morning. They checked the attic, the roof, the crawl spaces, nothing. One of the officers joked that maybe I'd been watching too many horror movies. The other said something that stuck with me, though. Old buildings do weird things. Sound travels through pipes and vents. You can think someone's right above you when they're not even in the same apartment. That made sense for a while, at least until the following night, when I woke to the sound of someone walking inside my kitchen. It wasn't faint this time. The footsteps were heavy, deliberate, moving slowly from the refrigerator to the sink. I lay frozen, watching the thin strip of light under the door flicker as a shadow passed by. My throat was so tight I couldn't even scream. The footsteps stopped just outside my bedroom door. The handle turned once, twice, gently, like someone testing it. Then I heard breathing. Slow, steady, right on the other side. I stayed completely still, clutching my phone, until the sound faded and the apartment went silent again. By sunrise, I'd had enough. I packed a bag and decided to stay with a friend for a few nights. Before leaving, I locked every door and window, double-checked everything. As I turned to go, something caught my eye, the vent near my bed. A folded scrap of paper was sticking out between the slats. I pulled it free with shaking hands and unfolded it. In the center, written in faded pencil, was a single line. "Stop recording me." I didn't go back for 2 days. When I finally returned, the apartment felt different, colder, like it had been waiting for me. I checked every room, every closet. Nothing seemed touched, but the air felt heavy, charged. That night, I heard the footsteps again, this time below me, pacing back and forth, mirroring the same pattern I'd heard above. The building only had 3 floors. There was no one beneath my unit except empty storage space. The realization hit me like ice water. Whatever it wasn't confined to one place. It moved. It followed. A week later, Mr. Harris showed up unannounced. He looked exhausted, older somehow, like he hadn't slept in days. "You've been hearing things again," he said, not as a question but as a statement. I nodded. He sighed and rubbed his temples. "That apartment's wrong," he muttered. "Should have sealed it years ago." When I pressed him, He told me bits and pieces, never looking me in the eye. Said the attic used to be a tenant's living space decades ago, before the building was renovated. The tenant disappeared one winter, left everything behind. No one could explain how he got in or out, but people claimed to hear him walking for years after. Some said he was trapped in the walls, others that he'd never really left. Harris said he tried sealing the place, welding the door, but tenants kept complaining about the noises. Eventually, he stopped renting the top floor altogether until me. I thought maybe it was over, he said quietly. Guess not. After that, he avoided me, wouldn't answer calls, wouldn't come by. I thought about leaving, but part of me needed to understand what was happening. So I did something stupid. I set up a camera in my bedroom facing the ceiling, left it running all night. In the morning, I watched the footage. For the first few hours, nothing. Then, around 2:47 a.m., the ceiling above my bed bulged. Just slightly, like something was pressing down from the other side. The plaster cracked, dust fell, and then an indentation appeared, a handprint, clear as day, fingers long and thin, pressing outward from inside the ceiling. I paused the video, heart pounding so hard I thought I'd throw up. When I hit play again, the hand slowly dragged itself toward the wall, leaving shallow grooves in the plaster before fading back into the ceiling. That was the last night I spent there. I packed everything I could fit into my car before sunrise and left without looking back. I found a new place on the other side of town, newer building, modern locks, no history. I told myself it was done, that whatever I'd let in was tied to that apartment, that ceiling, that attic. For a few weeks, life felt normal again. Then, one night, as I was unpacking boxes in the new living room, I heard it. A faint thud above me. Just one. I froze, staring up. A few seconds later, another. Then, slowly, a third. I closed my eyes, already knowing what came next, a soft, drawn-out whisper, crawling through the vent above my head, calling my name. And that's when I realized there was never any apartment upstairs. There never needed to be. It's me. I brought it with me. And now, no matter where I go, it always finds the space above.